As a research group, we were interested in developing our profile, not just within the university, but also externally. We started to explore how we could develop that further. And one of the ways of doing that was using Twitter as a vehicle of disseminating information quickly about what we were doing, the research publications that we were producing, and some of the activities that we had got planned. And from that point, literally within a minute or so, we'd got a Twitter account set up, and within a few days we started to gather a couple of followers. And I started to realise actually that this started to steamroll and we had some momentum going, and we started to populate it with some news items and some areas of interest that we were linked into and research activities that we were engaged with. And within a very short space of time, we started to attract quite a few more followers. And once I got the hang of how it worked in terms of a social media vehicle, I was able to then identify followers that I wanted, or as we as a research group wanted to follow. So we followed them, and then they followed us back. And before we knew it, we had accumulated 100, 150 followers. So we started to see that in actual fact it enabled us to move outside of our local area of contact with members of staff, and started to realise that it was a really important vehicle for us to be able to demonstrate externally the activities we're doing and what we intend to do in the future. And that's really important. And the reason that's important is because it starts to demonstrate that we're actually a really active group. And I think before we started to use social media, that probably wasn't really made very clear, or we probably weren't proactive in making that clear among our community. So that's enabled us to start to build relationships with partners outside of the university, whether that be at other universities that have very similar research interests, or whether that be external from the kind of university institutions that we work within. When we first started to develop our Twitter account, we were unsure as to how we would use it and why we would use it. They were probably the two critical questions that initially, when we worked to open our account, as a research group, we started to ask ourselves. And I think we soon came to the conclusions that really it was in our favour to start using Twitter, because actually a lot of our colleagues outside of the university, the academics who we aspire to be like, the professionals that we read about and we see, the papers that we view, are using it, and they're using it regularly. So I think for us it was something that, in order for us to elevate ourselves as a research group and also individuals, it was something that we needed to do. So we brought into it quite quickly once we had had that discussion. In doing it practically, there are a number of probably pieces of advice that would be of use. And I think the first piece of advice is one of consistency and regularity. Now, that doesn't mean that you're tied to your computer, having to constantly view Twitter, use Twitter, and be typing tweets in all the time. But in order to acquire followers, retain followers, and it's not for me about the number of followers, I'm more interested about who's following me. And I would rather have 10 followers and they are the leaders in my field that are interested in what I have to say and the articles that I'm putting on there and our views, rather than 100,000 followers of people that maybe really aren't that particularly interested in what I'm doing. So for me, it's about who's following. I think that's critical. And the way that I've established that is by following them and engaging professionally in conversations with them, so they actually see that you have an interest and that you have a view, and I think that's important. So I think one critical piece of advice is tweets being regular, tweets being consistent, so followers see you're engaged in it, but some mindfulness in what's being put on there, because that's accessible to a lot of people, and it reflects you as an individual, and it reflects you as a professional.